Hi folks, we're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast as you're driving along in your car, your truck, or on public transport. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the decline of Western manufacturing. It was really at its high point, sort of in the late 60s, early 1970s, and within 20 to 25 years, it went from that high point to being shrinking by, more than half, depending on how you crunch the numbers on this. So it was a stunning decline in a very short period of time, and something that even today, as interested parties look upon it, it seems almost impossible that it could have happened. Now, there's a whole range of reasons, and some of them sort of at the subset level and some at the meta type level, but there's a lot of reasons, and I'll go through some of them in this essay. Now, I had the benefit of having a front row seat during a lot of this as a younger guy. Anyway, it was starting to bite when I was just in my early 20s, but I got a front row seat in quite a bit of it, so I can talk from some direct first-hand experience. Now, I haven't done notes on this or done written up a script or anything, so I'm going off the top of my head. So I'll do the best I can to try and keep things in semblance and sequence. Now, Western manufacturing had always been, if you look at, say, the Industrial Revolution, where Western manufacturing, and Britain being the launch pad for this, whether it be beginning with textiles but moving to other things fairly quickly, rail transport, the efficiency of maritime transport, and so on, meant that tiny little Britain, with a population of not much more than 10 million at the time, could be outproducing in manufacturing output, could be outproducing nations that had 20 times the population that they did, places like India and China. So it radically changed and altered the balance of productive output, and where productive output was, wealth was attracted, investment was attracted, and wealth of all sorts, lower cost of goods, more people on wages were able to afford those goods, and so on. So Britain and Western Europe became industrialized, and really they were the only areas of the world that embraced industrialization. Even sort of Western areas in places like South America didn't really embrace it to the same extent. British colonies like Australia and so on, Canada did embrace it, or largely, even though they had very substantial primary product sectors such as wheat and wool and agricultural products, mining, and so on. So it's still the nucleus of manufacturing really was Western Europe and, of course, the United States. Now, the efficiency of manufacturing sort of reached its zenith, particularly in the United States, due to vast economies of scale. And you saw that happening in the early 1900s, say around American manufacturing for World War I, manufacturing all sorts of items for that, and also into World War II, where, again, the efficiency of American manufacturing really was probably the zenith of manufacturing output, productivity, economies of scale, efficiencies, and so on, that had really ever been achieved in the modern world. So it was interesting it is interesting to see how it went from being, the absolute shining shooting star of productivity and output to within a few decades, really, or so within 4 decades of that post-World War II boom there. Within 4 decades, it had shrunk to, again, a shadow of its former self. So let's have a look at some of the now. I guess say in Britain's case, where they were particularly hard hit, and a lot of this was lack of efficiency. But if we look at manufacturing centres in the US Rust Belt, could be an example of this. Some of these manufacturing centres were originally set up during different times when there may have been a coal mine nearby, and the coal mine was supplying cheap coal because it was steam powered originally, or coal was because there were blast furnaces that needed, things like that. Now, when these places move, these manufacturing centres, factories, moved to different forms of power where coal wasn't vital, or the mine was mined out over the years, then that benefit that they had for having the factory there wasn't. There was no longer a benefit in terms of the mine, a viable mine being nearby. Or the manufacturing centre originally was set up in sort of the pre-rail days, or in the early days of rail, when there just weren't the spur lines going off in all directions, and so they were relying on water transport to get their bring in their raw materials perhaps, or move their goods, the finished products, to marketplace and that sort of thing. So they had now a high cost of transport, or as time moved on, alternative costs of transport meant that if they moved their factory from here to there, they could then realise substantial economies by just relocating the factory. So there were those sort of factors that were filtering through as well. There were changes, particularly with that highway system that the United States introduced after after World War II and into the 60s and so on. That changed again the whole paradigm of cost of transport, moving things around, getting raw materials in, and again moving products to market and so on. So those factors were playing through the system as well. Another layer of consideration was, say, in the case of Britain, where coal was still quite a big factor in the British economy. A lot of those mines had to they were no longer efficient. You're having to go deeper and deeper underground, which meant a higher level of investment. In order to make that level of investment, the mine owners wanted guarantees from the government, these sorts of things. The government in turn would demand that they employed lots more people than they really needed. Okay, we'll give you your handouts, but you have to do what we want, and this type of thing. So politicization of manufacturing became, because it was such a big employer back in the time, it was easily politicized. So a car manufacturer would, for example, go to the government and say, look, we need to build some new factories, which would employ a lot of people. And the government would say, okay, we'll give you taxpayer money to do it, but you have to locate the factory over here in an area of high unemployment. The company executives say, well, that's a long way from any raw materials. It's a long way from market. It's going to be actually very expensive. There's also the level of education in those areas is very low, and we won't be able to move our better qualified, more experienced workers over to that factory, so we'll lose them and we'll have to start again. Don't care, the government says, it's now a political decision. We're giving you the money. That's where we want the factory. And so there were increasing inefficiencies within the system being built in because the government was handing out money, sometimes with very good intentions, by the way. There was certainly a push in Britain in the 60s and elsewhere around the world where say, let's get 3 or 4 struggling companies that aren't doing so good. Well, what we'll do is we'll merge them together and we'll create one big company, and then we'll just have one lot of subsidies and taxpayer handouts going to that entity. But it was done very badly and done very sloppily, and there were again what should have been a straightforward efficiency of manufacturing decision was so politicized because of the government was giving them money, and they wanted, no, we want 10,000 people employed by your factories. That's what we want, and we want this and we want that. Or you have to employ a certain number of black lesbians, and all these types of things. Well, not so much that back then, but those sorts of things were weighing these companies down. So they were constantly looking at achieving political objectives rather than efficiency of manufacturing objectives. And so there simply wasn't the investment, nor the investment in quality of management or organizational structures. And the British manufacturing became a watchword for low quality goods, and it seems to be staggering that such low quality products could be pumped out by British factories that 100 years previously had been considered the highest quality manufactured products in the world were now considered to be among the lowest quality manufactured products in the world. How could that have happened? But it happened quite quickly, and we see really evidence of, in Britain's case at least. You look at the most advanced technology that the British had in naval warfare ships. The Royal Navy, the Repulse and the Prince of Wales that was sunk by a couple of Japanese dive bombers. They were outgunned, substantially outgunned by the latest in German and Japanese technology. Not just a little bit outgunned, but substantially outgunned. The Germans and the Japanese had heavier guns that could fire over a longer distance and all this sort of stuff. So the British technology just wasn't. They didn't have enough anti-aircraft guns. They just didn't have anything that was needed for modern warfare. That was the most advanced British technology, naval technology of the day, and so already British, and that was their flagship technology capability. Even that was in decline, and was obviously in decline from the 1930s, and never recovered. So decisions were being made for all sorts of expedient political reasons rather than economic or manufacturing efficiency type reasons, and motor vehicles would be amongst the the classic examples that where the opportunities for success were the greatest, but where they were squandered and frittered away by really all sorts of again political decisions. But not just that, the trade unions weren't easy to get on with either, and management weren't very skilled at dealing with trade unions. There was a huge adversarial attitude there rather than, and they were too busy trying to score points on each other in the media and gain public support for their cause over the other guy's cause. And this meant that they didn't sit down together to talk about how can we make this work. In fact, it's hard to find any conversation amongst the Anglosphere, at least in the trade unions, where the management of trade unions during this time, where there was a determination to sit down of, okay, how can we make this work? How can we make the best motor vehicles in the world? And how can we make the highest quality at the best? There was none of those sort of conversations. There was, again, all sorts of political and social expediencies, and in some cases just pure egomania. Some of the aristocrats they kept putting into these roles as chairman or managing director or president of these people were only concerned with their own personal aggrandizement rather than producing a successful organisation. And it's not that the British or elsewhere in America they didn't have the skills. That the people were there, the high quality engineers were there. They just weren't able to be in the right place at the right time to make those sort of decisions. And to a lesser extent, but very, very much those sort of things were happening in the United States. But also there was an incentive called generically moral hazard, where the company, the execs at the company and the union goons too, realised that, you know what, we don't have to produce the best product at the best price. We can just go bleating to the government and they'll hand over taxpayer money. So we can be useless, incompetent, lazy, parasitic, all of those things. But because we employ hundreds of thousands of people and the government isn't going to let us fail, so they'll just keep on throwing money at us so we can become less efficient. Then they'll give us more money. We can become less and less and less efficient. Then they give us more and more money, and so on. So that cycle of moral hazard was very much in evidence, not simply in Britain, but also in the United States and elsewhere, Australia too. In Australia, there was a large steelworks, huge company that did steelworks, and the inefficiency there was staggering. But because they employed such vast numbers of people, they were subject to and able to get more and more government subsidies. So they went, okay, so they became less and less efficient until they couldn't compete with the least efficient manufacturer in the world. They were that inefficient and that parasitic and that lazy, and there was that much feather bedding going on. And people executives being paid money that they weren't even remotely entitled to due to their lack of performance and lack of care or commitment. I mean, where was the let's produce the best quality steel at the best? No one even was talking about that sort of stuff. It was all other things. Now, in terms of my own direct involvement, I was looking at or came across a number of the company that I worked for at the time produced a lot of testing and manufacturing gauge type equipment. So I was working for them, and I was only a young guy, kind of fresh-faced kid, and but I went to a lot of the meetings where they were looking at factories to improve their manufacturing efficiency. And the conversations were, and these were a range of factories ranging from, a factory that was making shoes, for example, to factories that were making electronics, or factories that were making products from steel and so on. So I got a front row seat at quite a cross section. Now, my sophistication of understanding of business was pretty basic at the time, but it was enough to understand what was going on. And it was to my horror at how, as again a young guy, barely out of being a kid, how many opportunities were squandered and frittered away by people who should have known better. And I was aghast at why these people who were, double my age and more, who were being so, as I perceived it at the least, so uncaring, negligent, I would even say, and quite stupid and self-serving about how they're. So here's an example of a shoe factory. Now the shoe factory had been, they had big orders for in World War II. They had big orders for like military, soldiers' boots and that sort of stuff. And that, again, in the Korean War, they'd done. This is in Australia. They'd done quite well out of orders for boots for the Korean War, and again for the Vietnam War. Now, the size of the armed services relative to what they are today was pretty big. So they had constant orders for boots coming in, and they worked out that because they got such big orders from the government was in effect, and I don't know how explicit this was, but they're saying, look, we don't care what you charge us for boots. That's fine. If you want to charge us sort of $1 million a pair, not that, but high price for boots, we don't care. But your factory's in an area of high unemployment. We don't want to see more unemployment there. So why don't you just employ lots more people, and then we'll let you charge whatever you want for the boots. And that was kind of the arrangement. So it was a real dance macabre in that respect. And whereas the equipment that they put in the 1939, 1940, when they first started making boots for the armed forces, they, I suppose it would have been reasonably efficient back in the day. There were some expediencies were put in because it was put in rather hurriedly. So they put the machines out of sequence, and so that there was a lot of inefficiencies in the way it was laid out. And this machine didn't fully finish what that part of the manufacturing process. It had to go to another machine, but that machine was in another building. Then it had to be brought back again, and then this, and then. So there was a lot of those sorts of inefficiencies in there, and I kind of could understand that because of the way it was quite quickly thrown together back in the day. But no one had sought to address that. Instead of becoming more efficient, they were just allowed to increase their price to offset any inefficiency that might have existed. Then instead of needing one operator per machine, they had like 4 operators per machine, again because it was an area of high unemployment. And so they, and some of this even was the government wanted to put a new housing estate in the area, and they wanted to guarantee jobs to people who moved there. So they would just lean on this factory to say, hey, just employ another 1,000 people, or have many, and that'll solve the problem, without looking at the efficiency of the manufacturing operation. It was always a problem that could be, like a can that can be kicked down the road for tomorrow, Look, there's an unemployment issue today, so just employ 1,000 people. Just do what the fuck we tell you. We're giving you plenty of taxpayer money. Stop giving us back chat. And it was that type of thing. So anyway, it reached a point. When this is when I was involved. It reached a point. This is in the 1980s. Reached a point where they the size of the military is being whittled down. There was the orders for boots were getting smaller and smaller, and the price the army was prepared to pay also was now under scrutiny. So where it was everyone turned a blind eye to the higher price, that was starting to stop now. So there was a limit to what the government was prepared to pay for boots and the smaller orders coming in. So they tried to go to doing just consumer item shoes. They had the equipment there, but the idea was how cheaply can we make this rather than what the quality of the goods are. And even the low quality goods that they had, of shoes that they were making, there was very clumsy attempt. Work boots was one area that they went into. They did have some minor success, by the way, in work boots, but they had a way too bigger employee base and this older and equipment and plant now. The lathes and the turning machines, all the other bits and pieces they had there was all very inefficient. A lot of the process was still done by hand, for goodness sakes. The union had negotiated, better and better rates and better working conditions. But, in the day when they first opened the factory, the working week was 48 hours. And it had now come to 37 hours, I think they'd got. And the wages had gone up. Also, the benefits had to be supplied, and there was deliberate attempts to force large amounts of overtime and things like that. So a lot of pressures were on the success of this operation. But we were sitting there with management looking at, and we had a look at how they had it laid out. So look, you can get all this different equipment in, manufacturing equipment. And if you lay it out this way and do it like this will reduce the cost of your manufacturing by, I can't remember what the percentage was. It was a decent percentage though, 35%. Given if you only need to reduce the cost of your manufacture by 23%, and this will give you a 35% improvement in productivity and so on, reducing cost, then this will make the factory viable. Now, the management looked at this and didn't sort of dispute that, okay, no, we accept that, and they did understand it. But they were looking at, okay, if we do this, then we have to get rid of half our workforce. We're going to have nothing but drama and struggle and fights with the government over this. We're going to have politicians, I'm paraphrasing, this isn't exactly what they said. We're going to have politicians on the phone jawboning us, making all sorts of threats. Why would we want to go through that sort of aggravation? My kids have got nice, cool jobs as advisors and flunkies for politicians in the federal government, and that would compromise that. And my wife's got a prestigious position in some sort of charity. But that's pretty much decided by the government who gets that. She'll lose that. And so there were a lot of political implications, social status things, and other things going on there. And they didn't want to compromise that. And so if they laid off that many workers, they'd be treated negatively in this. I don't want my kids going to school in the local school and having them shout, your dad fired my dad from his job, and now we have to live on welfare. They looked at, I think you understand that in a community. I get that. They looked at all the wider issues around that. So now I remember, I wasn't the one doing direct talking. My boss's boss was the one really doing the talking on our side, but he was pointing out that if you have these additional efficiencies, it'll give you the opportunity to produce new products, create new products, and keep all the people employed there, because you'll now you'll be selling much more product, whether it be in the private sector or consumer goods and that sort of thing. and why not sort of have boots for the Navy as well, or and so on. So he was trying to say, well, why don't you to see the bigger marketing opportunity if you have an operation as efficient as we've proposed, or can be made this efficient, that then opens a number of other doors for you. But organisationally, they become lazy, these guys. Social prestige, government handouts, keeping unions sort of off our backs, that's all we need to do. So in between, these sort of things, they just thought, well, why should we go through this pain and suffering? Why should we be fighting trade unions or fighting it's easy for us to just send it offshore to Taiwan or somewhere like that. They can do the manufacturing. Then we close the factory down. It's not our fault anymore. It's just we can say, oh, it's the economy or this sort of thing, or we wanted the government to help us, but they didn't, and so we can blame them. Or we can say the trade unions wanted too much, they cost you your job. So meanwhile, these people, they own the brand and they own, if you like, the marketing and sales distribution arm, but send the manufacturing offshore, and that's it. And then this is exactly what happened this instance, and was pretty much every instance I came across was at that time was the same. It was that same type of scenario. They didn't really want to be efficient. Why should we go through the pain and suffering of this? Why should we try to become efficient and organisationally efficient and professional? Why do that? And they'd slipped into a miasma of laziness and, I don't give a shit and all that sort of stuff. And that was very much not the only issue, but it was very much an issue that, as far as they were concerned, they kind of had a pretty easy life as it was. Why would they jeopardize that? So it was interesting that and it struck me at the time was that the idea of becoming efficient and becoming effective, having a viable manufacturing sector and an efficient one that was producing quality goods at an affordable price, that was considered just too much of a struggle. It was just going to be too hard, much too hard. The easy way was just to close the factory down. Now, I do understand these pressures, again, government handout. As soon as the government hands out money to you, you're beholden to them. And you're beholden to the politics of government, of employ more people, employ more black lesbians, all that sort of stuff. And so the protection industry that was used, to protect local industries, which I think is a good idea, by the way, the protection, whether it be through quotas or tariffs or subsidies or whatever, but in return for these subsidies, the requirement needs to be you must have an efficient industry, quality goods, world-class manufacturing operations, producing quality goods at an affordable price, where you can compete with any of the other manufacturers around the world on the key issues of distribution, quality, and price. And that's you must deliver that if we're going to subsidise you. But instead, governments, Western governments went the other way, and they wanted quick temporary fixes for an area of high unemployment, move the factory here, do this, do that, do so and so, which were all political considerations, not commercial business considerations. And I do understand that happened, and that created an attitudinal environment, the moral hazard issue, where a viable business wasn't the issue. It was a political sort of short-term, half-assed, bullshit employment sort of workaround of, well, we'll solve that over. We can win that electoral district. Let's put a factory there. So it's those sort of political considerations that very much played not the only part, but a significant part of why manufacturing declined. But it didn't need to. That was out of all the factories that certainly I was exposed to, I didn't see one factory in Australia that needed to close. None of them needed to close. They all were easily savable, as were some of the mines that closed. And I looked at some of the British mines that closed. Things like coal. They didn't need to, some of them did, but they didn't need to close. There were technological solutions and organisational solutions at hand that could have kept that mine open, but nobody was interested in that. The unions were fighting for we're not going to shift there. The managerial class were government handouts, I want to swan around in a prestigious looking job in a Rolls Royce. Yeah, no one has actually wanted to make the business or the manufacturing operation successful. None of them actually cared. If it didn't serve a political or social prestige purpose, they didn't want to know. And I was staggered by this as a young. And I remember there was a couple of meetings where, do you realise that this factory can be made viable? And at my age, I must have sounded like some little punk ass kid, but it was true then, and it's true now that I'd get this sort of smile from a guy who's double my age, who'd look at me, oh, you silly little punk, you just don't understand the politics of it all. And that's really what it came down to, the politics of it all. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.